Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And that is the place where autism meets the INFJ personality type.
Mhm.
We've got this article here from Cheap ABA
Okay.
called Adult Autism and INFJ, a unique intersection. And it's
Thanks a
really kind
lot.
of opened my eyes to some new ways of thinking about
Yeah.
both of these
That's a
things.
fascinating intersection, isn't it? We always try to put people in these neat little categories, but the
Hmm.
reality is so much more complex than that.
Yeah.
The article goes into detail about INFJs, sometimes called the advocate, and they're known for their empathy, their intuition, and this deep desire to make a positive impact on the world.
That's right. And that's what got me thinking, like, how does that empathy, which is so central to the
Yeah.
INFJ personality, how does that work with the social and communication differences that we see with autism? Because
Yeah.
it seems like kind of a paradox.
It is a paradox. And one of the things the article highlights is how both INFJ and autistic traits
Mm.
can actually amplify emotional sensitivity.
Oh,
But it's not just about feeling things more strongly.
okay.
Sometimes for people with autism, it's about being able to even identify or articulate those emotions.
Right.
That's where the concept of alexithymia comes into play.
Okay, now alexithymia, that's a new one for me.
Sure.
Can you break that down a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, alexithymia is basically having difficulty recognizing and describing your own emotions.
Hmm.
So imagine like you're feeling this wave of really intense emotion,
Yeah.
but you don't have the words or the internal framework to even understand what you're experiencing. It's like
Wow.
having this whole complex internal world,
Yeah.
but you're missing the language to map it out.
That must be so frustrating.
It can be very frustrating.
So you could have an INFJ who is normally very tuned into everyone else's emotions, but because of the autism and this alexithymia, they might not even understand their own emotions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that can create a real internal conflict, especially in social situations,
Right.
because you have this INFJ who desires connection and wants to make a positive contribution.
Right.
But the autistic traits might make it really difficult to navigate those social norms and expectations.
That makes a lot of sense. The article talks about this tendency for overthinking and analysis,
Yes.
and I thought that was really interesting. And they point out that it's common to both INFJs and autistic people,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing it might look different depending on where it's coming from.
You're right about that. INFJs are known for being really introspective, and they tend to analyze situations from all these different angles.
Okay.
They're always searching for meaning and understanding.
So for them, overthinking would be more about like finding patterns, connecting the dots, trying to make sense of everything.
Exactly. And for an autistic person, that overthinking might be more about trying to predict and control a world that feels very unpredictable.
Hmm.
It can be a way of managing anxiety or making sense of social situations that don't come naturally.
So same behavior, different underlying reasons.
Precisely. And that's why understanding this intersection is so important.
Right.
You can't just label someone and think you know everything about their inner world.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the complexity
Yeah.
and appreciating how those traits work together.
Well, speaking of complexities, the article also talks about sensory sensitivities, which we usually think of with autism, but they say that INFJs might also have these heightened sensitivities,
Yep.
but they might show up in different ways.
Talk about it. The INFJ's empathy is so strong, it can even extend to their physical environment.
Hmm.
So they might be really sensitive to things like loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, because they're processing all that sensory input
Okay.
on this much deeper level.
So it's not just being bothered by it, it's like it's turned up to 11.
Right. And this all ties back to the neurological differences that underlie both autism and personality.
Right.
There's a ton of research being done on sensory processing differences in autistic people, focusing on how the brain filters and interprets sensory information.
So it's not all about just the social and communication stuff with autism. The sensory part is really important too.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
And for someone who's both INFJ and autistic, those sensory experiences can be amazing and overwhelming at the same time.
Ah, so.
They might love certain textures or sounds and find them intensely pleasurable, but at the same time easily get overloaded in environments with too much sensory stimulation.
So we're really talking about like a whole different way of experiencing the world for these folks.
Exactly. A world where the senses are heightened and the emotions run deep.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder how those sensitivities along with that INFJ desire for meaning and purpose.
Right.
How does all that play out in real life? You know, how do they navigate a world that isn't really built for their needs?
That's a great question.
That's where the challenges come in, right? So far, we've been talking about all this in kind of a theoretical way.
Yeah.
But what does it actually feel like to live with this combination of traits? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, imagine this. You get an INFJ autistic person at a big social gathering.
Okay.
They're probably going to experience sensory overload from all the noise, the crowds, the constant chatter.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Even for someone who's not that sensitive, those things can be draining.
Right.
But for someone with heightened senses, it's got to be like a constant bombardment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're probably intensely aware of all the emotions going on around them.
Right.
The joy, the excitement, the anxiety, maybe even some tension under the surface. Remember, their empathy is amplified.
Yeah.
So they're not just observing these emotions, they're feeling them.
So they're getting hit from the outside and the inside all at once.
It can be very overwhelming. And then there's a social piece.
Yeah.
INFJs crave those deep, meaningful connections.
Yeah.
But social interactions can be so difficult for someone with autism. All those unspoken rules, the subtle cues, the pressure to perform.
It's exhausting.
It can be. So even though they might really want to connect, the how-to is a real struggle.
Like wanting to play an instrument but not knowing the notes.
That's a great analogy. It highlights the tension between the INFJ's desire for social harmony and the autistic individual's need to be authentic.
Yeah.
They might feel like they're always trying to fit in to mask their true selves.
That's gotta be lonely.
It can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness for sure.
So it's more than just being introverted. It's like they have to put on a performance just to get through a social situation.
Right. And it's important to remember this is just one example, one possible scenario.
Of course.
The experience of being INFJ and autistic is going to be different for everyone.
Right, because just like autism is a spectrum, personality is too.
Absolutely.
We're talking in broad strokes here.
Yeah.
But within those categories, there's a whole universe of individual experience.
Exactly. But even though there's no single INFJ autistic experience,
Right.
understanding these common challenges can help us create a more inclusive and supportive world.
Okay, so how do we do that? What are some practical things our listeners can do? Even if they don't identify as INFJ or autistic, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening know someone who might fall somewhere on those spectrums.
That's a good point. And one of the most important things, and it sounds so simple, is to validate their feelings.
Okay.
Acknowledge their emotions, let them know that you hear them and that their experiences are valid.
Especially for someone who might be dealing with that alexithymia.
Yes.
If they're having trouble even understanding what they're feeling, having someone else acknowledge those feelings must be so powerful.
Absolutely. It creates a sense of safety and trust. Another key thing is to be mindful of their sensory sensitivities.
So things like dimming the lights, turning down the music, maybe just avoiding places that are too overwhelming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not about walking on eggshells around them or treating them like they're fragile.
Right.
It's about creating a space where they can feel comfortable and relaxed.
I got it.
Remember, they're experiencing the world in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's something to respect, not fear.
So empathy and understanding, not pity or looking down on them.
Exactly. And I would say that includes respecting their need for alone time.
Oh.
Both INFJs and autistic folks often need solitude to recharge and process information.
So don't take it personally if they need to step away from a social situation or spend some time by themselves.
Right. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's how they take care of their well-being.
So basically recognize that their needs might be different, and that's okay.
Right.
It's about celebrating their unique way of being in the world.
Exactly. And that brings us to the other side of the coin, the amazing strength that can come from this intersection.
Okay.
Because it's not all challenges, it's also about potential.
That's what I really want to hear about. We've been focusing on the complexities and the potential downsides, but the article hints at some pretty incredible strengths that can come from this combination.
Absolutely. And those strengths are what we'll delve into next.
Okay, so let's talk about those strengths then. What are some of the positive things that can come from this INFJ autistic intersection?
Well, we've talked a lot about that deep empathy. It's not just about feeling emotions intensely, though.
Right.
It's about truly understanding human emotions and motivations on a really profound level.
So it's not just absorbing other people's feelings like a sponge.
Right.
It's like processing those emotions, making sense of them, and then using that understanding to connect with others.
Exactly. And for INFJ autistic individuals, that empathy can be even stronger. They might be able to see the world through multiple lenses, understand perspectives that other people just miss.
Like they have a sixth sense for emotions,
Yeah.
picking up on all the little things that most of us wouldn't even notice.
Exactly. And that ability to connect deeply can be so valuable.
Yeah, where would that be helpful?
Well, think about fields like counseling, social work,
Yeah.
even the creative arts.
Because they're not just watching from the sidelines. They're right there in it with you feeling everything you feel.
Exactly. And that brings us to another strength, creative problem solving.
Oh, yeah. We were talking about overthinking earlier.
Right. When you channel all that mental energy in the right direction, it can lead to some amazing breakthroughs.
So instead of getting stuck in worry and anxiety, they can use those analytical skills to find solutions.
Exactly. They might approach problems from totally unexpected angles, challenge assumptions, think outside the box.
It's like their brains are wired for innovation.
Yeah, and there are tons of real-world examples of autistic people excelling in fields like science, technology, engineering
Really?
because of their unique ways of thinking.
That's so cool. It's like they see the world differently, and that lets them come up with solutions that nobody else would have thought of.
And let's not forget about the strong moral compass that's often seen in both INFJs and autistic individuals.
Oh, yeah, that sense of justice, that unwavering commitment to doing what's right.
It's a powerful driving force. They're often driven by a deep sense of purpose, this desire to make the world a better place.
They're not just talking the talk.
No.
They're out there walking the walk, fighting for social justice, protecting the environment, whatever cause speaks to their values. Exactly.
And they're not doing it for the recognition. They're doing it because it feels right, because it aligns with their core beliefs.
That's pretty inspiring, I gotta say. It also makes me think about another strength mentioned in the article, intense focus.
Yes.
I know a lot of us struggle with staying focused these days,
Sure.
with all the distractions and everything, but apparently that's something that INFJ autistic people are really good at.
It's true. They can get into this state of hyperfocus where they become completely absorbed in a task or an interest. And it's not just about sitting still for hours. It's about this level of concentration that lets them really dive deep into something.
Like that flow state athletes and artists talk about.
Exactly. Where everything else fades away and you're just completely present in the moment.
I wish I could do that.
Well, it can be a challenge sometimes, especially if they need to shift their attention and it's hard to break out of that hyperfocus.
I can imagine.
But it's also an amazing asset. Think about all the incredible discoveries, the works of art, the technological advancements
Yeah.
that have been made possible by people who have this ability to focus so intensely.
So it's not just about being good at something, it's like becoming a master of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it highlights something really important. Neurodiversity isn't a deficit.
Oh,
It's a different way of thinking, a different way of experiencing the world.
I like that.
And when we embrace those differences, when we build a society that values and supports neurodiversity, everyone benefits.
That's such a powerful message because we tend to focus on what people with autism can't do,
Right.
all the challenges they face, but we should be focusing on their strengths, their unique abilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to create opportunities for them to thrive.
You know what I'm realizing through this conversation?
What's that?
We think of personality and autism as these separate categories.
Yeah.
But they're both part of a spectrum.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, are there other areas of our lives where we create these artificial divisions, where we hold on to rigid categories, when the reality is so much more fluid and complex?
Now, that's a question to think about. It is. Like
Yeah.
we've been looking at the world through this tiny little window.
Yeah,
Maybe it's time to open it up, embrace the nuances and the gray areas.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I love about these deep dives. It's
Yeah.
not just about learning facts.
Right.
It's about questioning our assumptions, expanding our understanding of ourselves and others,
Yeah.
and maybe even finding a little bit of wonder along the way.
And speaking of wonder, I think there's one more thing we need to touch on.
What's that?
The article mentions it briefly, but I think it's really important for understanding this whole intersection, the search for meaning and purpose.
Ah, yes, that deep desire to make a difference, to contribute to something bigger than yourself.
Right.
It's something you see in both the INFJ personality and the autistic experience.
And it makes me think about how people with autism are often seen as lacking social skills or being self-absorbed. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if they're just wired differently and their desire for connection just shows up in a different way?
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
It challenges us to rethink what it means to be social.
Right.
Maybe it's not all about small talk and parties.
Right.
Maybe it's about finding your tribe. the people who share your values and passions.
So it's not about fitting in, it's about finding your place, your purpose,
Exactly.
and using your unique skills to make a positive impact.
Exactly. And that's a message that goes way beyond just autism and the INFJ personality.
It does.
It's a message about being human, about that shared need for meaning and connection.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've talked about the challenges, the strengths, the complexities of this unique intersection.
We have.
But there's one more thing we need to discuss.
What's that?
Something that's really important for anyone who identifies with this combination or knows someone who does the power of support.
Yes, understanding is important, but action is what matters. How do we take what we've learned and actually support INFJ autistic individuals? That's what we'll explore in our final segment.
All right, so we've explored the challenges, we've talked about the strengths, but now how do we actually put this into practice?
Right. Understanding is one thing, but actually doing something to support these individuals is another.
So how do we support someone who's both INFJ and autistic?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that their needs might be different from what we typically expect.
So no more one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. We have to really tune in to the individual.
It can be tough, though, right? I mean, our world really pushes conformity and fitting in.
It does. But remember, for someone who's experiencing the world with both that intense empathy of an INFJ and the sensory and social differences of autism, even simple things can be really hard.
So patience is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't make assumptions about what they can or can't handle.
And we were talking earlier about how important alone time is.
Right. Both INFJs and autistic individuals often need solitude to recharge.
Yeah, to process everything.
It's not about babying them or keeping them away from the world. It's about creating a space where they feel safe and empowered to just be themselves.
And that might mean advocating for them in situations that aren't always accommodating.
Exactly. Like if they're having sensory overload at school or work, maybe you can work with teachers or employers to make the environment more sensory friendly.
So be an ally. Use what you know about their needs to help them navigate a world that isn't always built for neurodiversity.
Exactly. And that can look so many different ways. Maybe it's offering them a quiet space to decompress during a party.
Oh, yeah, the good work.
Or maybe it's getting involved in pushing for policy changes that promote inclusivity and accessibility.
Right. And I bet validation is huge here, too.
It's essential. Let them know that their feelings are valid, that their experiences are real.
Yeah, even if those experiences don't fit into what society considers normal.
Exactly. Validation creates this sense of safety of being seen and heard. And for someone who might be struggling with alexithymia, it can be even more important.
Because if they can't even understand their own emotions, having someone else acknowledge those feelings can help them make sense of it all.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate their joys, too.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
Their passions, their unique perspectives on the world.
It's about creating an environment where they can thrive, not just survive.
Right, where they feel empowered to use their strengths to make a difference.
And that circles back to the importance of valuing neurodiversity.
Yeah.
It's not about fixing people or making them fit in.
Absolutely.
It's about appreciating all the different ways of being human.
And supporting those differences.
So when we embrace neurodiversity, we all win.
We do.
New perspectives, new ways of thinking, new solutions to problems.
It makes the world a richer, more vibrant place.
More compassionate, too.
Absolutely. A world where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential.
Well said. Well, to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of autism and the INFJ personality type.
We hope you've learned some new things.
And maybe even gained a new appreciation for the complexity of human experience.
If this has resonated with you, we encourage you to keep learning.
Yeah.
Connect with others who share your interests.
There are so many great resources out there.
There are.
And remember, this is just one small piece of a much bigger picture.
It is.
There's always more to explore, more connections to make more ways to grow.
So keep asking questions. Keep learning. Keep embracing the incredible diversity of the human experience.
What a great note to end on.
Thanks for being with us.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of human nature.